All right, so this is lecture number 6 in Introduction to Ethics, RPH 205. And this one is about the tech billionaires. It's called Burn Book, and it was written by Kara Swisher, who is one of the most prominent, or was one of the most prominent journalists reporting about the dot-com emergence of dot-com companies. She got in on the ground floor. And she sort of decided to dedicate her career, or that 10 years, 20 years of it, to following these tech billionaires. Um, she reports in and says she's totally discouraged. They're completely corrupt because at first they were um, they were going to change the world, and it was all going to be this wonderful new stuff, and everything was going to change. I remember at one point when the internet was first introduced, I thought, oh, well, this is the way that climate scientists will be able to map climate change, and they'll be able to be much more specific. The public will get information they really need to convince them that, yeah, we have to do something. Of course, that isn't what happened. Instead, we got social media and a lot of other stuff that's totally distracting us. So this is about, it has a section on Bezos, Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, the head of Uber. Um, I think those are the main ones. So they all went to college, right? But what is college for? They certainly didn't get that. They have ambition, but what her conclusion is, they were supposed to apply their skills for the sake of social well-being, like the old Greek model. And what actually happened is they're just in it for the money. And they are destroying literacy. People don't read because they're on their social media or whatever they're on, and it's disrupted young boys, especially ability to launch. Pornography is a part of that. Video games that glorify war is a part of that. They are connected in the mind of Glenn Hedges. So this is so the themes in general, I will always go back to Aristotle's virtues. I will, talk about how Athens became corrupt, how our great democracy is becoming corrupt. Mr. Mate said we have a toxic culture. Mr. Haidt said social media is a major factor in this. Glenn Hedges says TV celebrity culture, which is also social media, ups the ante in terms of celebrity culture, and people don't read. And the illusion of love, social media aggravated that. And then what is college for? What should students do when they come to college? And now we have smart people. These people are smart. The world in some ways is run by engineers right now. I can tell you when I was in college, it wouldn't occur to me. My only idea of an engineer was like the janitor in my grade school or something. No, engineers are major players. So Charles Koch has a bachelor's in, I think, chemical engineering from MIT, and he is the fossil fuel billionaire who is insisting on staying with fossil fuels. And he's the one with 100 front organizations to stop environmental laws. He himself got punished by environmental laws, and he's just fought back the rest of his life. It doesn't really matter what's happening to the climate because he's still fixated on not getting punished in the future. So Donald Trump's Project 2025 is definitely one of the points was to destroy all environmental laws. So engineers, there's an engineer at the head of all that. Our Supreme Court was, there was a group called the Federalists who spent many millions of dollars, but identifying which judges in the country are the most conservative. They want to go back to before the Civil War at the origin. What did the founding fathers have in mind? And they certainly didn't have environmental laws as part of their structure at the beginning. But that doesn't mean they wouldn't want us to have environmental laws at this point because they were cutting edge. They wanted us to adapt to circumstances. But that is not the way six of the Supreme Court judges rule now. They use texts and traditions. They can even plug in texts and traditions and will come up every decision that was made based on texts and traditions. So we're going back to before women could vote, when we still had slavery, and the decisions made then are considered legit, and they're being instigated at this point. So that's, I bring that up because the tech billionaires would have the capacity to set up a green energy transition. Bill Gates wrote a book called Getting to Zero, and he was serious about the green energy transition. He wanted to get to zero by 2030, but because of AI, and AI uses a lot of energy, he's delayed that. He's into nuclear power rather than renewables. But then Elon Musk, uh, Steve Jobs, these Zuckerman, all of them are engineers of some sort, and they really have different goals. So if you remember on Aristotle, it's important. You had the moral virtues, and then you had the intellectual virtues. And I said then, and Greek uh, poetry, philosophy, Homer, Hesiod, tragedy, Plato, they all had smart people. The smartest people had the capacity to do the most good or the most harm. It depends upon their goal. All of them are ambitious, but it's not rational ambition. It's not figure out what you can do that you enjoy doing, that you think the society needs, that you can meet that need and make a better society, and also preserve democracy. So preserve a middle class, preserve generosity, trust, and goodwill between people, weave together people to have a strong social network. Okay, these guys are not that. She said that at the beginning, she really believed in these guys. They were saying that they're visionaries, that they're going to create a whole new world and it'd be so much better. And she says, you know, at the end of the day, of course, that isn't true at all. And we'll go through the first page or two of her book because right now, just within the past week or so, Donald Trump has gotten elected again. So the moment when she figured out all they cared about was money was after Trump got elected, and they all bowed and scraped and kissed up to him, even though they didn't want him. They said nasty things about him before the election, but they totally kissed up to him after because they want government contracts. They want to make money. So this time, after he got elected, they all donated $1 million to his inaugural, which of course is pocket change. Truly, it's the equivalent of 2 cents for a middle class person. That's how skewed these the wealth inequality is in this country. But it goes back to the Greeks. When you have smart people, it's very important that you educate them to be virtuous and generous because greed will destroy any society, but it will especially destroy a democracy because the sophists were greedy. They taught the privileged class how to use manipulative rhetoric and get whatever they want. So, what about social media? Um, so, I do want to make clear to you there's a story here about the rise and fall of Athens, the rise and fall of America, toxic culture, social media, literacy, celebrity culture, uh, sexual perversions, war, aggression, sexual aggression, and war, as opposed to what is college for. So this class is, with Mr. Dershowitz about college is for finding out your calling. Definitely did not happen in the case of these tech billionaires. Very few of us, and also they get treated like celebrities. And she's just trying to point out they're not celebrities. I'm sorry, they're jerks. Don't worship them, don't admire them, don't want to be like them when you grow up. Uh, she's worried, which I think is understandable. Um, anyway, so here she is. That it's hard to tell from the chapter titles who's who. The mongoose is Bezos. Um, but steeple who needs steeple. So the quote is that they just care about money. As it turns out, it was capitalism after all. If I had to pick a moment when it all went off the rails for the tech industry, I would choose December 10th when I was at the farmer. Okay, she remembers this pretty well. Um, let's see. Okay. And these guys all met with Trump, even though um, so they, at first, some people just couldn't believe that they would kiss up to him, but they did. Um, After decades of covering the nation, the just origin of the internet industry, I could believe it. They were uh, an increasing number of these once fresh-faced wunderkinds I had mostly rooted for now made me feel like a parent whose progeny had turned into, well, assholes. Okay, my first call, and then she started calling them and realizing that she didn't want them to take the invitation. Don't kiss up to him. But Musk thought, no, he can convince him. Okay. Now, the interesting thing is the second time around, right? Musk's like, they're all on board. No problem. Mr. Thiel is also playing a huge outsized role. If you want to read about him or go on, there's YouTubes about him. But I mean, you got to find the honest ones, the critical ones, because uh, there's just a lot of propaganda out there. Okay, so that's the basic idea. And so I will go to the outline here. Okay, so here's the outline, some of the things that I picked out, but you can pick out your own. I sure wish you might consider buying the book because just immersing yourself in the book for an afternoon, it takes 3 or 4 hours maybe, but you can literally put another neural connection in your brain and you have that. So you understand, right? Now that They all just headed for Mar-a-Lago. And oh yeah, that happened 8 years ago. So you have a history of this, and you can. That's why she wrote the book. Here's the history. Um, okay, so they're kissing up to him. So these powerful people are trying to, outmaneuver each other. All of them have these huge egos. They all, claim to think they're actually better than the other one, but no way, Jose, right? They're all the same. Anything for a buck. Now, the other thing you could say, well, capitalism, any of these people could retire tomorrow and start a philanthropy, and like Bill Gates, and they could start really pouring money into green energy or dealing with income inequality. You can't apologize for these people. They don't have to continue in these jobs. And they don't have to sell their souls just to make more money to get higher on the Fortune 500 list. They're competing with each other for the Fortune 500, what number they get. It's it's so corrupt. And it's just so much like the story of Athens, except that Athens didn't have this much money. They weren't international corporations. There were rich people, but a lot of Athens' corruption was power. They wanted that power block with Sparta. Okay. Many of the tech leaders who had been supporters of Hillary Clinton had openly opposed Trump's stances during the campaign. All of them pushed back when Trump called for a complete shutdown of Muslims entering the U.S. and announced a plan to severely limit immigration. Two of the invitees, Musk and Microsoft, were immigrants themselves. Okay, hello. They had privately derided Trump as a buffoon, but that's not how they presented themselves. They were just complete hypocrites. They kissed up to him, even though they themselves were immigrants. Okay, this is what money does to you. Okay. Over time, I watched founders transform from young, idealistic strivers in a scrappy upstart industry into leaders of some of America's largest and most influential businesses. While there were exceptions, the rich and more powerful people grew, the more compromised they became. The genuine person fell deep inside a cocoon of comfort and privilege. When people get really rich, they attract a legion of enablers. They start to think of this fawning as reality. Once again, we're back to celebrity culture, right? They've become celebrities. They sort of believe in themselves. They believe in their public identity, which is just theatrical, it's fake. It's theater, performance. They're deluded. And that was what Socrates said to the people that he talked to. You think you know more than you know. You think you're more powerful than you are. He's exposing them, and he got killed for it. I don't think in our country you're going to get killed for it, but you do get shut down. You get silenced. Nobody pays attention to you. You're not an influencer. Okay. Let the public know that you're not going to Trump tire. Yeah. She called him up, right? She said, don't just let the public know that you're not going to bow down to this king, but you're going to stand up to a bully, right? You can resist his stances against immigrants. But they didn't do anything, right? You can insist that we invest in critical technology that point to ways to revolutions in things like health and transportation, but You can defend science because climate change is a big threat and tech can be a crucial part of fixing it. And they did nothing, and they still do nothing. 8 years later, they're still doing nothing. They wanted contracts with the new government, especially the military. They wanted to be shielded from regulation. And that's the Supreme Court justices have cut regulations. And they also wanted to cut taxes, which is another thing that Trump is right from the beginning is talking about cutting taxes. He also is saying that he doesn't want to have any debt ceiling. He wants to eliminate the debt ceiling and let the debt go up to 5 times more. The Republican Party had a reputation for fiscal responsibility, which was completely false. Reagan blew up our deficit. Bush blew up our deficit. Um, Trump, the first time around, blew up our deficit. Yet a lot of people still feel like, oh, they're the responsible ones. And the only reason they think that is because they don't want social programs. Well, social programs save money. Plus, Democrats will tax the rich. So for the Inflation Reduction Act to Build Back Better, those were pieces of legislation that started a whole lot of green infrastructure projects, and they were paid for by taxes of people who make over $400,000 a year, right? You tax the rich and you provide money for infrastructure, for going green, for other products and services for the public good. But these guys come in, all they want is to cut taxes. Okay, so she is really completely cynical about the society is becoming isolated and addicted to its gadgets. The tech companies just flood misinformation to us. We have weaponized civil discourse and we have weaponized politics. So it's not a very happy first chapter. All right, Mr. Bezos was an engineer. Then he set up his own company in 1994. He wanted to sell something, right? He decided on books, right? So what happened, 2000, 2002, that was when the internet, all these new companies were being founded, but most of them went broke. All right. What about Steve Jobs? Steve Jobs was different. I had said before that he raised his kids middle class, well, probably not middle, right? Upper middle class, going to public schools. He and his wife, it was important to them that the kids have a real childhood and teenage life. Like Mr. Haidt would say, they have to go through these experiences. They have to have the ups and downs of teenagerhood or childhood and teenagerhood. So he was different. He believed in working as long as necessary to get the design and the technology right. He was masterful at keeping people focused on the vision of the idea. He had a reverence for the creative process. And then he introduced podcasts because, quote, any democracy depends on a free, healthy press. I don't want to descend into a nation of bloggers. So, yeah, I don't blog because, again, I don't want, first of all, my thoughts can never be reduced to a blog. And I don't want that because the person reading it can't process it well enough. It won't stick in their head, or it'll stick and get attached to something else. I really just want people to think for themselves, but You can't think for yourself unless you read books and you think about them. Anyway, he thought a lot about privacy, unlike Zuckerberg. The worst thing that could possibly happen as we get big and we get a little more influence in the world is if we change our core values and start letting it slide. It's all about what happens tomorrow. Let's go invent tomorrow. And yeah, we didn't do that, right? Jobs. The fact that he started podcasts for those reasons are really, really good, right? To know that you need an informed citizenry, which is exactly what happened in Athens. That Agora was structured for an informed citizenry, and then the rich got trained in how to flood people with misinformation and emotional appeals, and it was all over. So Steve Jobs later on said, the media industry is screwed since the best technologists are working for people like me and not like you, right? He knew that we need good reporting. We need to constantly be flushing out the dark side. We need to know what's motivating these people, not worship them like celebrities. And Steve Jobs, was aware that we're losing a depth of mind that you have to have in a democracy. This is not rocket science. It's not something so profound. It's not elitist. You can be a working class person and know when some jerk is pushing your buttons and trying to manipulate you. But right now, with the decline in public education and the saturation of Fox News and these appeals to emotions of fear and pleasure, fantasies and phobias, and then your own Facebook posts and all that, it's just getting worse and worse. But that's what education's for. That's what college is for, is to wake up, get out of the cave, as Plato says. Okay, what about Zuckerberg? Okay, so internal texts revealed his true feelings about users who handed over their data so easily. They trust me, dumb fucks, he wrote. Right. So, I mean, there was a time we had business ethics. I used to teach it. You were supposed to respect your customer. Wow. And nobody cares. It just drives me nuts that nobody seems to care. We have a hardening culture that prioritizes growth over safety. And this will come up again when we at first established capitalism, and the original creators of it did not separate it from government programs, and they did not prioritize growth. It was not growth at any cost. Okay, Facebook has this problem with bad use of consumer information. You probably know more about that than I do. I know some things about it. This is, again, same as on the height. His goal in order to make money, how do we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible? So that's the attention economy, right? Economy is based on stealing your mind. And it's not just competing with somebody else, it's making you unable and unwilling to be reflective. So growth hacking. So he's trying to hack. We have another book called The Hacking of the American Mind, and that's the food industry, what that does to your body chemistry. But this one is also hacking. It's hacking your attention, hacking your ability to be reflective. All right, Facebook was terrible about maintaining privacy. And Zuckerberg considers himself a victim. Okay, so people criticize, oh, he's such a victim. But they still delude themselves into thinking they wanted to change the world. It was all about the journey and money was not the goal. They were all lies. And they lied to themselves. This is another thing that happens in Greek tragedy and Homer. They're lying to themselves. They think they're great and they're not. And they do all sorts of damage. It I there is a movie about Zuckerberg, but any sort of artist, if they knew Greek tragedy, which they usually, I'm sure they do, there's so many plot lines, that would be so necessary. Just have the same sort of type of character and type of situation, type of mistaken judgment, all these basic pattern of tragedy. You could just fill in Zuckerberg and Bezos and all these guys, just like you have Agamemnon and um, Odysseus and all those other guys. That would be fun, I would like that. Okay, he craved power and historical significance. His hero is Augustus Caesar. Oh my gosh. He's uh, Zuckerberg, through a really harsh approach, established Augustus Caesar established 200 years of world peace, right? That's why he admires him. It's his hero. But he had to do certain things to maintain order. Oh gosh. Yeah, this is not a free and open society, right? And Mark Zuckerberg is not creating world peace. I'm sorry. Um, okay, so between speech and truth, he chose speech. Between speed and perfection, he chose speed. Between scale and safety, he chose scale. The aim was to move fast and break things, and obviously he's broken a lot. But to me, as a philosopher, he's broken our minds, but you can always choose. You choose to let him break your mind. Um, he's set up his corporate structure so that he can never lose his job on the board. And it's not democratic at all. He can be a completely bad manager and he will never get punished for it. He set it up that way. He controls the voting shares. Okay. More people across the globe get their news and cues from social media, and it has this ability to generate anxiety and rage, and it's addictive. Um, the new paradigm is engagement equals enragement. So this is made worse by the people who run the companies, who are completely unaware of the consequences and who just, we want free speech, we're Democrats, we're in favor of freedom. That's exactly what happened in Athens. And it is separating. Okay, so you go back to Aristotle, anger, appropriate anger. And anger is tied to fear. So social media stokes fear of the other, fear of people you don't know, and that's leads to anger and polarization. So a lot of this is not, it's not by accident that you have political polarization and you have people spending a lot of time on social media. Okay, then there was a question of why does he let Holocaust deniers? Why doesn't he censor them, take them off the social media? He said they might not mean to lie. He didn't, Zuckerberg did not understand the dangers of the proliferation of underbaked conspiracy theories, hoaxes, and misinformation. He's naive to some sense, but he's just greedy. He doesn't think about it as far as I can tell. Alex Jones finally got caught for what he said about the school shooting in Sandy Hook. I don't know if you know about that, but he said it's a hoax or whatever. and he did. The parents sued him and won. Um, Alex Jones, used Zuckerberg's network as his vehicle, even as he gamed it by breaking all the rules that the company had laid down. And Zuckerberg says, quote, as abhorrent as some of this content may be, it gets down to the principle of giving people a voice, right? I'm Jewish, and there's a set of people who deny that the Holocaust happened. That's deeply offensive to me. But by the end of the day, I don't believe our platform should take that down because there are things that different people get wrong. I don't think they intentionally get it wrong. It's hard to anticipate intent and to understand intent, though it is not, at least when it comes to Holocaust deniers. 2 years later, he officially prohibited Holocaust deniers. Quote, my own thinking has evolved as I've seen data showing an increase in anti-Semitic violence. Whoa. So now all of a sudden it has to do with him. Oops, this is me. Oops. Well, what about all the other people, the Sandy Hook? What about, he just has no empathy. It has to literally hit him in the face before he understands anything about the impact of what he's doing. And this is where Kara Swisher just says he wasn't evil or malevolent or cruel, but he was and is incredibly naive. Why he's one of the most carelessly dangerous men in the history of technology who didn't even know it. He went to Exeter and Harvard. And I think that is a big problem, that he was so isolated. He never had any obstacles. He never had anything to fear. All he had was this constant blowing up of his ego. He doesn't understand racism or sexism, but also evil actors, what they do to get power, what they do to put an enemy in harm's way. He's just naive, and he's not learning. Obviously, boy, after Trump got elected, he's up there, giving his $1,000,000 and talking about how great this is. Anyway, the next one was the founder of Uber, and his big thing was toxic masculinity. And there was a woman who quit her job there and was a whistleblower, and she told about how awful, how sexist the culture was. More and more white male homogeneity in tech. That means almost all the people in tech, and then higher up as you go, was creating problems that the people at the top could not perceive or understand. Lack of women and people of color in the leadership ranks. They ignored issues of safety, not because the people were awful, but because they never felt unsafe a day in their lives. You have to have empathy. The best way to have empathy is to go to a public school and, a city school where you have lots of different kinds of people, different class, race, ethnicity, gender. And more children are isolated at school. So children are more segregated now by race than they ever were, and that's because it's class. The suburbs will have good schools paid for by their real estate taxes, but you have to be rich enough to buy a house in that area to have a good school. And if you're poor and you live in the city, you're screwed, right? Your real estate taxes are nothing, and the schools are not going to be good. So that the sexist climate, okay, so these people are growing up without any empathy or any belief that they should have empathy. Again, Greek culture was set up for that. And then, if you remember, I said when it was getting corrupt, they didn't think that those stories, those tragedies were about, you have to purge yourself of this. This is a toxic emotion. Get it out of your system. They said, oh, Homer feeds the irrational drives, and naughty, naughty Homer. But yeah, And yeah, I do think it's funny. And yeah, I do sort of admire these power hungry guys, and that's just human nature. And yeah, and Homer teaches us that and shows us that, and that's the way it is. So they they completely appended the original idea of the good life, human flourishing, and the responsibility of citizens to maintain a free society. Um, and the lack of empathy in social media makes that worse. Um, yeah, so there was just horrible treatment of women, and then other people had no idea what was going on. So this woman, um, whistleblower, she was attacked relentlessly for trying to remove revenge porn and other manner of racist and misogynist hate speech. In that controversy, she was subject to a truly heinous set of attacks on her personality by Reddit users who veered into violent threats. Another book, there was a book, Not All Dead White Men, written by Mark Zuckerberg's sister, who is a feminist classicist. And she was talking about Reddit and how sexist it was. And it also uses stoicism. It wants to go back to the classics to justify all this misogyny. Things like, yes, men really are wired to be more rational than women. Women really can't take care of themselves. Men really have to step up and do it. And and so when Zuckerberg wrote her book, she got attacked on Reddit. She also got a lot of anti-Semitic attacks. So maybe Mark Zuckerberg might have been thinking of his own sister, but it just, that just goes, and everybody's addicted to social media. And they don't pay attention to any of the reasons why you should think twice. Um, Tech leaders simply reinvented the wheels. Any sort of shortcomings like sexism, um, they just wouldn't deal with it. They just thought this is a brave new world, and we're not going to be like the old industrial economy. And when it comes to drives like sexuality, like pleasure and fear, the basic drives, we can go right back to the primitive level, as primitive as you can imagine. Election interference. Um, okay, yeah, so Mark Zuckerberg, um, there was Russian bots, there were bots, Russian attempts to interfere, the impact of the election on Facebook. Um, so they wanted to interfere and impact the election on Facebook, and they did it persistently. And again, Zuckerberg defends it. Maybe somebody dies in a terrorist attack coordinated on our tools, but we believe in connecting people so deeply. Anything that allows us to connect more people is more often is de facto good. It's like, uh, he says, the idea that fake news on Facebook influenced the election in any way, I think is a pretty crazy idea. It's not crazy. It's all verified. Um, They didn't handle the propaganda, not from the Russians, not in Iran, and not in Sri Lanka. A Buddhist mob attacked Muslims over false information spread on Facebook. Um, Quote, this is the last quote. Zuckerberg and Sandberg have attributed their mistakes to excessive optimism, a blindness to the darker application of their service. But that explanation ignores their fixation on growth and their unwillingness to heed warnings. Facebook was a platform designed to create crisis and rage as the rubles rolled in. It was a system-wide problem, and company execs continued to act as if it was easily fixable. If that were true, why didn't they fix it? So, yeah, this is not only that. The thing that's interesting is the latest on Zuckerberg is that right now, in order to make more money, he is trying to figure out how to get 4-year-olds addicted to Facebook. He and his wife started their philanthropy. Oh gosh. And so they gave a ton of money to neuroscience research. Well, and Mate talks about this. I think some of the authors later on talk about this, but we got a hold of neuroscience, right? We really know how the brain works, but the marketers got a hold of it. And so corporations use neuroscience to get people even more addicted to whatever it is they want them to get addicted to. So and then Zuckerberg uses these results of neuroscience to get 4-year-olds addicted to phones, which you really have to think about where they're at in terms of brain development. And if it gets arrested development, I have 3 kids, right? Any stage along the way, it can go bad. And it's hard on a kid because they're vulnerable. All right. So my son worked his butt off teaching kids in the inner city, which is great. I was proud of him. But he was under so much stress, he got cancer. And a lot of executive directors in inner city schools get cancer. He got neuroendocrine cancer, which is from plastic, because plastic leaches endocrine disruptors. Everybody knows, the scientists know that. But the companies won't fix it, and they threaten the Environmental Protection Agency. They can't make laws, or they're whatever political party is in power. If they make a law about plastic, we'll lose the next election. Every candidate running in that party will lose that election. So we have all these poisons in our system. We have social media is a huge poison. And again, that educational system is declining. Education for public school children, poorer children, is in the decline. And then they have their phones. And so just you have to picture. Oh, yeah, I was going to say about my son got sick, and then my grandson was 10 years old. And he said to somebody, "Is daddy going to die?" Right? And so somewhere in his brain, that must have been a watershed, right? I mean, he's a really nice kid. He hasn't, but 30 years from now, 20 years from now, he might be at a therapist talking about how that changes orientation toward the world. But just imagine what happens to a 4-year-old. Oh my gosh, I just don't know why people don't realize that we need to develop, in the way Aristotle said, we need to develop cognition. We need to be curious about everything, then become reflective so we can make good choices about our lives. But if you arrest someone's development at age 4, if they never read a book, is that where we're talking about utopia, where they never read a book? Do they have to learn how to read? Or do they learn how to read on their texting, or what? And why do parents give their kids phones? Or it's crazy. When my kids were growing up with TV, why do you put your kid in front of a TV all day? It's terrible. Those aren't real people. I knew that a long time ago, that would be very damaging to a kid. They don't know the difference between the person on TV and a real person. That was my intuition. I didn't want them. They could watch half an hour of cartoons. They could watch sports, but I didn't want them watching sitcoms because anything that appeared to be human beings, that wasn't. It was just a script designed to make money, is really dangerous. And that's what we've got in spades right now. So, um, yeah, to me, the best way, the best defense you have is to think it's your mind.